Good afternoon. This is Arman Rusta with the Polymath Project. Today is Friday, September 29th, 2017. And on today's show, we'll be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is sports. And another topic of mine that I enjoy is politics. We'll talk about the intersection of sports and politics and how it affects us all on a personal level, the business implications, and the way that the world is changing and becoming more open with social media, with how transparent things are becoming, with how we're able to capture instantly what people are saying, what people are doing, the Twitter presidency, and the impact that that has on the world and on the country here in the US. And I'll talk a little bit about my background in the process. I grew up here in New York, born and raised, and until the age of 22, all I ever wanted to do was become a professional soccer player. That was my number one goal and direction, and I was on that track. Went to Columbia University, a Division I college, and became a student athlete. And had to make a choice, made a choice at the end of college to take my education and my skills and move them to a new domain. But I've continued to follow sports as an avid fan and always believed that sports had tremendous power to really help bring the best out of us personally, individually, but also collectively. How do you get past your differences with other people and get together as teammates on the field? How do you shake hands with an opponent that you spent the last 2 hours trying to beat, essentially, and compete with? So the concept of sportsmanship. How do you recover from a devastating injury or some kind of major issue or struggle, using the sports field as kind of an internal domain to deal with those challenges that we have? And I think there's a similarity between sports and politics in that way. And the issue that we'll talk about today, things like Trump's recent statements that got the NFL players, owners, and coaches riled up enough to basically set the stage for a league-wide protest. We could see some pictures here of players from this past weekend kneeling while the national anthem is being played. And we know that that stirred quite a bit of controversy. And this all started over a year back with Colin Kaepernick, formerly of the San Francisco 49ers, beginning this protest, this form of protest, as a way to really create a dialogue with communities, to create a dialogue with local authorities about the way, in his vision, minorities were being discriminated against, things like police brutality and other issues that minorities, and specifically African Americans, face in the US. Even with all the progress we've made, there's still work to do. I think anyone would generally accept that premise, but then how one goes about expressing dissent or trying to impact change is another question, and that's something we'll be talking about quite a bit with a guest, Connor Dalton, who's someone who has some interesting perspective on it. We'll have a conversation about it and frame it through the lens, again, of social media, seeing how players, professional athletes, that are on TV in front of millions of viewers use their social currency to make a statement and to make their opinions known, just the way President Trump did, using his currency as a successful business magnate who then moved into media with The Apprentice and then utilized that platform, the social currency and brand reputation he had, to move into a new field, into politics. Which really qualifies him as a polymath, whether you support him or not. I'm not a big fan of Trump myself personally, but looking at his career and his track objectively, one can say that this person has been very astute as a business person, as a marketer, leveraged that very effectively to launch a successful, popular show on TV, and then leveraged that very effectively to move into politics. So that's, in essence, the definition of a polymath, someone that's been able to basically succeed and show a proficiency and an expertise in a multitude of different seemingly unrelated fields. Now, I say seemingly because ultimately, in the end, my belief is that everything's connected. And I believe that's the way a polymath sees the world, that everything influences everything else. Everyone influences everyone else. So if we have a society where 9 out of 10 people are living great and living well, and one person's struggling and suffering, we can't ignore that. That's something that ultimately can impact or bring down the big picture and all the others. We're all connected, and that's, I think, something that we've seen and we see through some of these pictures and protests, something that I believe Colin Kaepernick was aspiring to and still aspiring to basically be a polymath in his own right. Here's a professional athlete at the peak of his career earning millions of dollars that was willing, whether you agree with his actions or not, to put all of that on the line in order to stand up for other people, basically becoming like a political, social activist. And to me, just again, the way Trump and others moved from different fields into politics, that's something that you see happening in sports, which is, to me, fascinating, and I think it's a great forum for it. It's great entertainment when you enjoy a sport, but when those people that you respect and you follow have opinions about other things, and of course we're going to listen to that, it can really impact the way a lot of people think. So are athletes and celebrities role models? That's, I think, like it or not, the answer is yes, to some degree. People are going to look to you. They're going to follow you. Whether they like you or not, they're still going to follow. The way even Trump's negators will still follow him on Twitter to see what the president has to say, so they can have something to converse about or something to react to. So I believe it's a great opportunity we have that this conversation has opened up. And today we aspire not necessarily to take sides, but to highlight the issues and try to bring some sense and rationality and objectivity to what's going on, and maybe think and talk about a little about what might come in the future. I'm excited again to look at what's going to happen on this weekend's games. Come Sunday, we'll talk a little bit about last night's Thursday night game in Green Bay, which I think had an interesting twist to this whole scenario. And we'll be back in a minute with our guest and dive deeper into this issue on politics and sports. See you in a minute. Welcome back to the Polymath Project. This is Armand. I'm here with our guest and good friend and colleague of mine, Connor Dalton.
Hey, happy to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Native of Waterford, Ireland,
Yeah.
who's been here now for what, a little over 2 years?
A little over 2 years, yeah.
Good stuff. How's the New York and American dream suiting you so far?
I mean, alive and well for sure. Yeah, no, it's been great. I mean, it's you know, a lot has changed over 2 years, but I've kind of, you know, anytime anyone asks me, I always kind of say it's been a lot easier to assimilate into the New York style of life than I think one would assume. You know, I think it probably helped the fact that I'd been here many times, and but no, I mean, I think look, we're heading more towards a global culture. So
absolutely, no, you've got a fast start. I've observed it from the beginning, and just for reference, for the audience, Connor's marketing director at Blue Liner, a 17-year-old digital agency, and also one of the instructors for the 7 Pillars Digital Marketing Academy. And so with courses, with the fall semester, kind of about us. What are you excited about? What do we have to look forward to as far as the 7 Pillars goes and your involvement in it?
Yeah, well, for the fall kind of semester, I guess, we're kicking off 7-week course in the middle of October, and then we're also in October and November we'll have a 1-day bootcamp version of those too. So similar concept. The 7-week course is slightly more immersive in the sense that it kind of takes, there'll be a key topic each of the 7 weeks, and then there'll be kind of assignments and takeaways for the various different entrepreneurs and small business owners throughout those 7 weeks. But the boot camp is fantastic too. I mean, if people, time is such a precious commodity for people. So the 1-day boot camp really allows them to, within 1 day, in the morning, it's a little bit more, of a like informative educational kind of section or whatever. And then in the afternoon, it's more interactive and kind of case study based. So 2 sessions within the 1 day versus your 7 sessions, but they both are tremendous value to small business owners, entrepreneurs, or even someone who's already working in marketing. I mentioned to you before that obviously Blue Liner has been using 7 Pillars for our clients. When did it start? Like
2003, 2004.
Yeah. And again, born out of necessity, as you've kind of always said, and coming from financial services and professional services marketing to the agency side, it really hot-shotted my transition in the sense that we're dealing with, when you're in a company, you're dealing with the same kind of issues, I think, or challenges. Agencies all about new challenge, new clients, new day kind of thing. So and that's quite aligned to what entrepreneurs have, in terms of like the various different issues they have to deal with. So it's it's the integrated nature of all 7 Pillars as opposed to killing it on any one thing. I think there's just tremendous value there.
No, it's a holistic process, and I've seen how you've picked it up, tremendously in terms of not only applying it to client work, but again, the philosophy and the methodology behind it. And it's very interesting how it's kind of gone from a marketing tool to something that could map onto entrepreneurship.
Right.
And now today, our great challenge is, taking that kind of polymath view and that holistic view and utilizing some of these principles and tools to discuss this kind of hot button of our times and of the day, of politics and sports. So let's take a shot at it, huh?
Sure.
To try to dive into the issues with this lens. One of the things I like in the number 7 is the way we can chart it out to the global market from a marketing point of view, right? It's 7 billion people on the planet, and we are all connected. And it's if you have a cell phone product or whatever your product is, you're looking at this global market and then trying to segment your different let's say, customer segments and market segments. So from that point of view, or with that in mind, talk about who you think this issue is impacting. It's very interesting that an American sport and American politicians now kind of took root on Sunday morning with a protest that started in London. So, what are your thoughts on how, let's say that different audience that wasn't necessarily, we're trying to expand the NFL to other countries and globally.
And it's been going well, it's in Europe we would call it American football, right? So, but it's really, over the last few years, the tradition has been developed of you know, I mean, certainly since I was college, people were starting to, you know, having Super Bowl parties and things like that. And that's not, you know, I mean, in the GMT time, that's, you know, your game starting at like 2 a.m. or something, you know, so it's a late night thing. But it kind of started getting this kind of, it's definitely getting more popular, you know, definitely for sure, in general. And so something like this, I mean, you know, as soon as Trump came along and made it his issue, I mean, he's a global issue, right? So while this kicked off in London, and there certainly was, you know, there was interesting reactions somewhat regionally there, I think it affects everyone. And it's kind of one of these things where every so often something comes along that everyone's going to have an opinion on, you know? And I think the recent political shift has inspired people to realize that having an opinion on things is important. Having an active opinion on things is important. And you can no longer shy away from something. So I think this is like, you know, is kind of like a shining beacon example of that. But I think it's an issue that draws out opinions that people have from other areas and they project it onto this. So it's obviously very dividing. You know, a lot of right-wing people are very against it, or a lot of left-wing people are very for it.
Right.
And then, you know, the concept of what the players are doing. And then Trump obviously makes an opinion on it. You know, I think before the London game he had said they should be fired,
right,
you know, at whatever players don't react to it. So, I mean, what's interesting there is people have been for or against the actual acts these players are doing, but then Trump's take on it, some of the people that are against it, you know, or even for what they're doing, are then have a converse opinion related to what he's doing. So it's kind of like cracking out into two beasts.
Right.
And I don't know, it's interesting to see that his involvement in something hugely sways public perception, which is no surprise really, but it's funny how people have different views on the topic versus the man's actions on it.
I mean, it was already a big issue, you know, since the beginning of the 2016 season when Kaepernick started doing so, and Trump has commented on it before. It's not the first time he's made a comment, so it's interesting that as his comments got stronger, and on last Thursday, a week ago from yesterday, you know, he made a really strong statement at his rally in Alabama where he called them sons of bitches and they should be fired. It was really strong and very intriguing that sparked what was previously a group of maybe 30, 40 players that was taking actions, and predominantly the minority players that were speaking out against police brutality and discrimination in their own communities. And now all of a sudden all the players and owners, which to me I was impressed to see that level of unification and unity. From, obviously there was a lot of discussion that happened, you know, and people had different ideas, and in general most teams took a team by team approach to saying whatever we do, we're going to do it as a team. Coaches, players, owners, at least for 1 week. Now this is week 2 about to come up. Actually just started last night. I think what I want to do is let's take a quick look at again, taking using some of our 7 pillars tools. So we have the 49er matrix up here on the board, and you know, in particular we'll pay attention to you know, pillar 6, social media, and mode 7, analytics, and try to look at some data, right? Let's look at some data on how people are feeling. So, you know, the polls, what they're saying on social media, some of the images that are kind of pervading the internet now, and just kind of discuss that a little bit, because this is the way we can kind of take a technical approach to see how people are feeling, because this is a PR and a media kind of beast in a sense, right? And it's got different heads to it and can go in different directions. And that's why you see certain players that, let's say from the Pittsburgh Steelers, that stayed, which is a generally conservative city, stayed in the locker room, didn't even come out for the national anthem. But one player who was a former military serviceman in the Navy or the Army, he actually came and stood in the tunnel, but he was by himself. The rest of the team was behind. So it was like, brought up a lot of issues and reactions, and now certain players said they regret that they didn't come out, and that this week. So you can just kind of see how everyone's playing off of the reactions and the responses that come through generally social media, because that's how people are expressing themselves instantaneously.
Well, people feel very comfortable kind of expressing themselves on social media, and it's like, it's not just a chat at the bar, right? You know, it's measurable, and it's, I don't want to say it's permanent, but it's out there, right? So
Right.
we can really see what the true sentiment of it is. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's such a complex, there's a lot of layers to it, you know, because obviously an NFL team or any team really has to be a huge unity there anyway, okay? So if majority are going to act in a certain way, for the greater good of the team, people are going to, you know, be there for each other, you know, they're brothers in arms or what have you. But then there's also the what's happening outside the team. So that's a very unique example of, you know, that former military service guy who actually he didn't want to fully, I mean, he obviously didn't go into the field, so he didn't want to fully disregard what his team was doing, but I mean, he obviously had some very important principles, you know, of his own there, you know. So, and I think that reflected on what's happening within social media. People are really kind of, there's a lot of outcry over how these people could be doing something so, you know, unpatriotic, I guess, in certain people's eyes.
Yeah.
But then there's been, you know, the people who are commending it are kind of saying, well, look, there's been so much, I don't know, you know, it's been ignored so much for so long that it's amazing that people are actually, you know, have the balls now to take a stand like this, you know. And I think there's several interpretations going on too, because I think even Kaepernick, when he did it at the start, was talking about kind of the police violence aspect of it and the race kind of element of it. And then I think, I don't know, it's like people are coming out on social media now and identifying with key parts of it, you know, and somewhat shying away from other parts of it. So it's quite like, it's a complex thing. It's almost as if each social interaction is one tiny piece of the puzzle within an overall like jigsaw that's being built of what this is really representing.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, different players are taking different approaches to even how they protest and, in a sense, what they protest. I mean, there is one general issue of the discrimination against minorities. That's the pervading theme. But I've heard other components of people having other issues or questions. Is the way minorities treated systematic and systemic of the way our governments and governance is been conducted in this country? And this is a kind of a domestic relations issue. How does that relate to possibly international relations issues? And I know there's, as you can see, one of these images we're looking at here of a fan here in the stands saying that he thinks the flag is being disrespected, and those that defended our country and our freedom, and the military essentially is being implicated here, which I don't believe has been the main message, and it's not the main message of what Kaepernick and others are standing for, but it doesn't mean others can't.
Don't take it that way.
Right,
yeah.
Don't take it that way. I thought last night was a great moment in Green Bay. We could look at an image here. Aaron Rodgers, obviously one of the poster children for the league, one of the top 2-3 players in the league, who's obviously, he's not African-American, he's white. And he does, been talking to his teammates, trying to better understand their perspective, their issues, their challenges, and asked the fans in Green Bay to lock arms in unity with them. And to me, that's a sign of actually unity, a sign of respect. No one in that case is really trying to disrespect country as I see it and as it's been kind of communicated. But obviously that's not the way everyone necessarily takes it. So it'll be interesting to see how
linking
that
of arms
up.
is when you say that's, I mean, I personally couldn't take anything negative from an act of unity like that. I feel like maybe that's a more, I don't know, effective way of communicating something like that. But it's a very interesting time for all this to be happening in. I mean, like Trump his campaign was really run on headlines, right, and sound bites, and we were doing some research earlier, and his Twitter following has increased like 230% since this time last year. So he's really like created this like digital soapbox to stand on, and feels like even on acts like, I don't know how you could condemn linking of arms, but he still feels like he has a right to do that because maybe it's that social vanity where he is trying to bring everything back to himself.
And I want to talk about that a little bit, because the main message of what the players started protesting for could be lost amongst this whole battle against Trump. So it's very interesting that that galvanize the whole league to kind of stand up? And are they standing up more for just freedom of speech and freedom of rights?
Yeah, and
or
peaceful protest is an important right too.
Exactly.
Which again, he has said things supporting that before in other areas.
Right.
And now he's, again, that's not our main focus here.
Right.
We're more talking about this issue, but it's...
Exactly, but it's interesting how he comes into it. There was this research poll on CNN, and as you could see, it's the NFL versus kind of Trump in a certain sense. So he manages to get himself into the conversations. But the research data is very interesting, right? That you could look at the information almost as if it's kind of even, the amount of people that support versus feel that these protests aren't necessarily appropriate. And then when you start segmenting it by ethnicity, you see that, 80% of African Americans support it, whereas 80% of white folks actually feel it's something they shouldn't be doing. And then also looking at it by age, I think is very interesting, that people over the age of 45, we have 60% of people over 45 disagree with the protest, think the athletes are wrong, and only 37% of those under 45. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, because the old school, more traditional forms of respect and ways of thinking, the way our parents might think about something, is very different than what younger folks generally are a little more open and a little more kind of new ways of approaching things. So to me, that's very natural that it would be that way, and that's. And
I agree, and I think you could almost remove it. It sounds strange to say that if you removed the topic and just applied that to the general sentiment on America right now, that it would be somewhat similar. But I think it's such a binding issue that it's interestingly now so divisive, right? It's supposed to be this area where, it's obviously so much more entertainment, but it brings people together, in the spirit of competition and, adversity and this kind of belonging to a team and supporting a team and seeing your team win or supporting them through losses. And it just seems to be now that with politics and news bleeding so strongly into the entertainment category, and then this also going from sport into entertainment, that it's all just this one hodgepodge where, you throw everything in, you mix it up, and all these opinions are kind of pervasive down through the different channels within each, and it's interesting, just that, more people watch football than vote, and then the celebrity president can't help but put himself in that conversation.
And it's interesting that the conversation about ratings in the NFL for various, because there's a lot of other topics in the NFL. There's the topics.
He pulled out the ratings card.
Of course, and other topics are influencing that, like the concussions and the CTE, and also player conduct issues. Are these guys just kind of rich, spoiled, celebrities that are treating women the wrong way, and there's been some high profile cases there. So I think player ethics has come under greater scrutiny, which I believe is a positive thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the CTE and the concussions, player health, mental health, physical health and wellness, even after the game, after they're done being gladiators and fighting for everyone's kind of Sunday fan club. How are these guys living the rest of their lives, and is that their responsibility or the league's responsibility as well? So it's a lot of great issues. And that we can't cover all today. I think this topic is powerful enough. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll continue on this topic, but with another lens, with more of a personal, collective development lens, and talk about some potential resolutions and predictions about what's going to happen going forward.
Cool. Sounds good.
Cool. Be right back.
Just luck, just better.
All right, I'm back with Connor Dalton, Marketing Director at Blue Liner and instructor for 7 Pillars of Digital Marketing Academy, and we're talking about the highly divisive hot button issue of the NFL protests, President Trump's recent admonition of the players, and the response, the league-wide response that's taken place. Recently, something pretty interesting happened. This just was yesterday, I believe, that a number of the owners, coaches, and players met with the commissioner of the league, which is something that hasn't happened around these issues since Kaepernick started the protests in 2016. So apparently this Trump, for better or worse, has initiated something to really move the issue forward and move the conversation forward in a way that seemed to be, from hearing from the players afterwards, very constructive, and one where the players felt like they were heard and that they were able to better listen, and everyone was able to understand both sides of the equation. Because at the end of the day, the NFL is a business, and the owners have these franchises that have value, and they want to continue putting out a good product, a good entertainment product that helps them continue to generate revenue and value and TV ratings. Otherwise, you know, the whole thing, the platform for everyone will be lost.
Yes, everybody loses if they don't kind of get a handle on what really is happening.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting perspective. In this part of our conversation, I want to take the focus to through the lens of our kind of time bug 2020 life vision lens, where we focus on personal, individual, and also collective development for families, for communities, and with a real eye towards the future and goal setting and resolution. So it was really, on that note, it was great to see that the different sides of the different parties with different interests kind of came together to start discussing that. One of the players from the New York Giants, Casillas, actually made a great analogy, an interesting analogy, comparing Kaepernick to Rosa Parks, and saying when she stood up or went to sit in the front of that bus years back, there was huge outrage, and it was against the laws and the rules, and not that it's necessarily a perfect correspondence and correlation, but the fact that
it's
Kaepernick,
similar, you know, he's breaking the mold, and then the first person to. It's very easy to jump on, not easy to jump on the bandwagon, but it's less risky, easier. I mean, he's now without a team, right? So he's no longer with the 49ers, and just, you know, we're talking about player ethics and that coming under more scrutiny. You know, a lot of the players who have violations under, you know, a lot of these areas are not without teams. They have no issues funding a team, but yet it's obviously a very controversial subject. But he no longer has a team like Kaepernick. It lost his. I mean, assuming he
put it on the line.
He put it on the line.
He put it on the line.
Price, you could say.
He put it on the line, and it was great to hear other players acknowledging that and feeling that the NFL and as a collective group, we kind of left him hanging. And but you know, at the end of the day, it's still very early in the process. Whether or not he plays football again, I don't think is the main issue. I'm sure financially, hopefully, he saved some money from the millions that he made. He had some big contracts. And
he was Super Bowl 2014.
He was in the Super Bowl. They almost won. They lost a close one to the Ravens. But he was a great player that year and many other years, and still could be a top quarterback in this league. Now, I think, again, as we said about Trump, whether you support him or not, his kind of polymathic kind of career, multifaceted, moving to different areas. I look at Kaepernick the same way. Here's a world-class, top of his game athlete, putting that on the line because he felt strongly about not his own goals and interests, but you know, true to our topic here, the goals of others. And it's something we highlight in the Time Bug in 2020 philosophies, is that as driven as we are, you know, especially here in America, it's all about go and get it, be ambitious, you know, compete and win, and it becomes very individualistic in a certain sense, and sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that the goals of others, having empathy, compassion, and just taking time out of your own self-interest to focus on what is important to other people that you might care about or feel for. And to me, that's something that, when we talk about sports and politics, first of all, for politicians, that's their job. Your whole job is to actually focus on the goals and needs and feelings and opinions of others. It is supposed to be your job, and some politicians, I'm sure, really feel that and provide service.
Yeah,
Same for military, right? I mean, if you're
Absolutely.
going out there, you're risking yourself for the goals and needs and values of others. That's what it's supposed to be, not necessarily what it always turns out to be. And for athletes, you know, you could look at it both ways, and there's you're making money and having a profession, but you're also providing entertainment value. But when you do what Kaepernick does, you're kind of crossing this transom from like being an entertainer to being a social activist. And so to me, that's a Polymath type move. And he's kind of also, like Trump, gained a huge following, was the #1 jersey sale for a long time. So love him or hate him, he's made an impact, and he's someone that will go down in history as someone people talk about.
Well, you know, as they say, kind of controversy creates cash, you know, it's kind of one of these things. But I think what's important, like, looking at others and kind of sacrificing himself for other people, again, not to, you know, I mean, without putting him on too high a pedestal, it's what I do admire is that he did it at a time where he really, really had the most, you know, social currency, had the most to lose, was in the most important place of his career really when he did it. It's not as if he did it after he retired.
Right. And no one would have listened to him anyway, because once you're an athlete that's out of your prime, it's all about the new guy coming up, and the veterans don't quite get, you know.
No, but it's interesting, and it's kind of I think, you know, in general, more on the time bug side and the 2020 side, you know, it's tremendously fulfilling and rewarding to help other people achieve their goals, or at least be an integral part of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think sometimes we get out of this mindset, we get into a win-lose mindset when we feel like we can only succeed at other people's expense. And I think that is the general tone that's being pushed out on all media right now. But we all know that that's really not the case. You know, when you've had an instance where you've kind of lifted up someone else while you were yourself kind of progressing towards something, it's tremendously rewarding, and actually probably works out better for you. You know, so I don't know. That would be my opinion really, as how that kind of links into the other side of the whole argument of, like, if people are going to be active about this, to have other people's interests, or to really not just be speaking from their own point of view, or putting themselves in other people's shoes, is really where the best points come from, you know? I mean, like, seeing other people's perspective on this kind of, I don't know, it makes it not all for nothing.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely. Well, I think it ties into something we brought up earlier on, which is, you know, to be more objective. When you take a step back and out of your own skin and out of your own day-to-day, you know, focus, you can actually develop more empathy, compassion, and have an objective approach, even towards issues like this.
Yeah.
You know, if you were on the right and I was on the left, and we were just battling from our idealistic kind of trenches, and unwilling to kind of step outside and let me come see how things actually look from your end. You know, like the meeting that the owners and the players had, or meetings that can happen in other contexts. That's part of where this principle of focusing at least 10% of your energy on the goals of others means at least come out of your shell for 10% of the time to truly stand behind someone else, someone that you may not totally understand. And that's something that, again, politicians and athletes, we like to hope that they can all embrace that, especially politicians who are responsible for governance of large groups of people.
But I think, you know, I agree with you. I think I would consider myself to have a unique perspective on it, seeing as, like, you know, living and working here and having the same, you know, goals and interests as the majority of people that are in the same industry, say, as me, or live in the same area as me. But interestingly, you know, that, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, the national anthem or flag. It doesn't have that same supercharged thing for me. Obviously, I can see how other people have, you know, are linked so directly into it. So it's interesting.
You could be a little objective.
Yeah, a little bit objective, and it's kind of, I think that allows me to see maybe more sides of it too, you know. But it's I just think, again, just to reiterate, I think it's fantastic how it's like, it really is the perfect hot topic for right now, because it takes all the issues that have been all this pressure that has been compounding up until now, and places on like a scenario which people love, you know,
Right.
like something a lot of people hold very near and dear, and they either love it or they hate it, and then they either love or hate this issue on top of that love or hate issue thing.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, and
So thinking about it from a personal development and kind of collective positive outcome standpoint, what do you think would be a good outcome in this sense with this issue kind of coming to the forefront? Paint us a nice picture of how this might be able to reconcile and move forward positively.
I think the arm linking is very positive. I think, I mean, I don't think the act of kneeling is disrespectful. You know, I mean, you kneel to a king, right? But it's obviously it's been taken like that in this context. So I think the most positive outcome would be that obviously, you know, teams would come out for it. But I think that, you know, maybe it was a new tradition now where the teams would and fans would link arms as the anthem is playing, because, I mean, anything that is going more down the track of unity can only be good. I think that's exactly what the world is missing right now. There's too much, you know, there's too much dividing within divisions, and, you know, it's like everyone's trying to siloize everything, and I think anything that's an act of, you know, togetherness, I guess, is only a positive thing. So I think that might be, like, I think in my view, best case scenario, we come out of this with a new tradition, nearly, you know?
Right.
Let's all link arms during the national anthem.
Interesting perspective, and I think that's a positive look and possibility. I guess we'll find out as these weeks unfold and the various reactions take shape, and you know, it'll continue being a conversation. It's something that's certainly not going away anytime soon. Hey man, thanks for being here and talking about that. We'll catch up on that and some other topics, you know, in the weeks to come. We'll have you back maybe in a couple weeks, huh?
Awesome, you got it.
Cool, thanks, man. Connor Dalton, everybody. We'll take a break and be back and wrap up the show with some final statements on this interesting theme for the week about the NFL protests.
In India, 50% of our population lives on less than $2 a day, and they have no access to any kind of public health system which can take care of them.
100 years after the first heart surgery, less than 20% of the world's population can afford it. For 80% of the world's population, if they ever require a heart operation, they're going to die.
You see a small child, mother is holding a child, and you tell them that there's a hole in the heart which needs to get fixed. The first question the mother asks in this country is, how much is it going to cost?
The patient and their family should be focused on the healing and the recovery and not having to worry about the finances.
Health City is a vision to change the way that healthcare is delivered and to provide the highest quality of healthcare at the lowest price to the largest number of people.
Anyone that doesn't believe that healthcare is being disrupted outside the boundaries of the U.S. is not watching what's happening in the Cayman Islands, and they're not watching what's happening in India.
We have to find ways of reducing cost. You can no longer spend 18 or 19% of your GDP on healthcare. It's unsustainable.
I believe that India will prove to the world that the wealth of the nation has nothing to do with the quality of healthcare. And once that happens in India, it will be very easy for other countries to follow.
You know, last Thursday when President Trump made these provocative statements regarding the NFL and the NFL protests, it really sparked something. We saw what's happened over the past week, And it'll be interesting to see what happens this Sunday and in the coming weeks. I think it's opened up a very intriguing and important topic, something that Colin Kaepernick brought to light last year, back in August, before the 2016 season. And even though he's not in the league this year, that's carried forward into the way players have responded both before Trump's statement and obviously in droves, the entire league-wide response that happened this past Sunday. I think it will continue. It's interesting that Trump has taken issue with how these celebrities are using their social currency to exert influence. I think he knows deep down the way he did as a celebrity, as a successful businessman, did the same thing and leveraged his currency to make his statements, to make known what his political opinions were, and then actually leverage that to get into office. He knows what kind of power there is in that, and the power of marketing and media and how to use it. So when a group of the most powerful sports business and franchises in the world goes not just in our own country, but to another country, to another continent like Europe, and puts up this signal of protest, this sign of dissent and dissension, it's something that can be quite alarming, to someone who's actually in charge of this organization or this country, where you want to be able to report to the rest of the world that people approve of the way we're doing things and that we have kind of an internal unity, which in essence and in actuality we clearly don't. And so I think that really gets more and more highlighted by this type of high-profile level of dissension, and people being bold enough and brave enough to bring that to the forefront. So I think it's a constructive and important conversation. It's obviously highly charged. How it gets resolved and what the future holds, you heard Connor and I discussing some ideas for what a good picture would look like going forward. I think in addition to the way players are accepted or embraced for and fans for their expression of dissent or protesting, I think equally as important is how those issues then that get brought back into the communities, back into legislation, back into the way we look at the relationships between, let's say, law enforcement and different members of various communities, what some of the problems have been, really coming to the table there, arm in arm, in a unified way. And for players to do more than just protesting on the field, but show it through your social currency and your actions when the game is over in the off season. What are you doing with your nonprofits and your charities? Are you going back to the inner cities of Chicago where there's gang violence as an athlete and talking to people, talking to gang members and different members of the community, going on a tour with the local police, as I know some NFL players have, to see what life is like through their lens, where they're going through, let's say, potentially dangerous neighborhoods and trying to make sure they're protecting other members of the neighborhood, protecting themselves, protecting each other, doing their job as law enforcement, which is not an easy job. It's something we need to respect and understand, and not just come to this polar position that all police are abrasive or rough or discriminatory and prejudiced, which is not true. And so when we take that stance and that position, in my eyes, that's just as wrong as taking a blind eye position and saying that, that the police are totally innocent. It is case by case. We have to come together and be as objective as possible and help each other understand the way players and owners of the NFL got together this week to help each other gain perspective, just like a different camera angle on the issues, and be compassionate and empathetic towards the other side. So that's part of where I hope and believe this can go, but it requires people, and the leaders especially, people like Kaepernick, like Rodgers, like the owners of teams. I was very proud to see some of the owners kneeling with the players. I know they didn't all agree with the protests last year and even this year, which is the reason why a talented player like Kaepernick hasn't been signed. But I think there was a turning of the tide this week with what happened, and I believe that's a positive example for what's possible going forward. As it relates to business opportunity and innovation and some of the things we focus on here on the Polymath project, I'll quickly highlight that a political, social, activist type tool like the Advocator, which will be launching in October within the next 30 days. You can see some screenshots here. It will allow people, much like Kickstarter, to crowdfund for money, but instead of money around great ideas to launch new products, it's money around social causes and issues, exactly like the ones we're talking about here. So regardless of what side you might sit on a particular issue, you could utilize this platform to kind of galvanize and rally folks that agree and support that same position. And then through those crowd-funded dollars, you would be able to hire lobbyists and form political action committees that, as we know, can do a variety of things, from advertising to influence on legislators to kind of change those laws that we feel may be unjust. And there certainly are a lot of opinions about that nowadays. And it's kind of a feeling of disenfranchisement that if our candidate didn't win, we've now got 2 years of 4 years of kind of being and feeling powerless. That's not necessarily the case. There's tons of laws and things that are being voted on and proposed all the time. So, I see tools and companies like the Advocator as possible solutions and possible integration points with the kind of issues we're talking about today. In fact, a Trump-supporting PAC recently launched a series of anti-NFL ads. So that's an example of something I don't necessarily agree with personally, but something that obviously in this free country groups can do if they truly believe a certain position. They can take that position in a legal way. So we encourage that. The Advocator will encourage it, and it's something that once we launch will be interesting to see how it coincides with this kind of social issues we're seeing with the NFL right now. So we'll come back next week. We'll probably touch on this topic continually going forward, but this was a really intriguing discussion. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day and a great weekend, and we'll see you all next week.